Trevor Noah just asked the question that nobody wants to touch. Was integration a mistake? On his podcast, Noah was talking about this podcast called What Now? And the former Daily Show host pushed back on the idea that integration helped Black Americans. He argued that segregation, without the racism, might have been better. So then he brings on somebody to talk about this, and he brings on a brilliant sociologist, a good friend of mine, Ruha Benjamin, professor at Princeton University, who laid out why integration actually weakened Black communities, stripping them of self-sufficiency, businesses, and institutions. Noah even pointed to Finland, a mostly homogenous country, as proof that a lack of diversity isn't always a bad thing. But is it really the same thing as what happened in America? I'm going to pull up the question here because I think that it's an interesting one when it's proposed to a brilliant person like Ruha Benjamin. I'm going to, whoops, we got a little tech issue here. Let me see here. Where is that video? This is why I'm not allowed to do things unsupervised.
I'm curious if the chat can also chat. What do you think? Do you think that? I mean, I see that Zakia has an opinion here, and a lot of people probably do have an opinion about whether segregation was a better, more sustainable plan for the Black community specifically.
Yeah.
Or whether we gave up half of the farm for 1/10 of the supplies, maybe. I don't know.
I mean, it's a fascinating question. I want to bring up. I want y'all listen to this exchange. As Bullet said, weigh in in the comment section. Let's talk about it. And I want to get your take on the other side of this too.
Was the right move. And now I'm separating two things because I know in America people are like, well, of course. I mean, there was racism and there's segregation, and I go, yeah, no. I'm separating them. Let's separate someone being oppressed and someone not being able to get a job and someone not being able to get a bank loan. Let's take all of those, the negative things away, because I'll put myself out personally and say, I think whether we're talking about gifted kids who are anomalous, let's say, to the norm, whether we are talking about, and I mean anything that does not fit into a category, I think the part of the reason Finland is able to do it is because, have you been to Finland?
It's very homogeneous.
I've been to Finland. You know who's in Finland? Finnish people. That's it. And because they're all Finnish, there's an idea of like, no, we all head in the same direction. We all know what our actions mean. And that's a really powerful thing I've learned in communicating with other people. When I'm in a room with anyone where we start to tie together multiple things. So if I'm in a room with Black people, already there's like an implicit trust because we know what certain actions, words, and vibes mean. And then you're in a room with another African. Already. Now, even if you shout at me, I know what your shout means. The same way an Italian knows what an Italian shout means.
Yeah.
Right? I know I'm prefacing it with a lot because it's a loaded question.
Yes.
But I would love to know if you think integration was the right solution, maybe, on the other side of, what America, of civil rights.
Yeah. No, I don't. And I don't think it's actually that controversial when, if you understand that segregation and integration weren't the only options. Like within those two options, it may seem like integration is the more progressive. Like, of course, we don't want segregation. But again, when you're being integrated into institutions, into a culture that's a supremacist culture, that's a culture that feeds off of hierarchy, that feeds off of insecurity, anxiety, why are we being integrated into that? And so part of it is to question what we're being invited into. And so, again, when you think about the example of Finnish being homogenous, nation states are imagined. The national identity is not something that is, God-given. It's not something that, existed for eternity. These identities were created, maintained, made durable over time. And so part of the stretching our imagination is to recognize all of the things that have been made up, but made to seem immutable, fixed, intrinsic, including our national sort of identities. And so part of it is really like to denaturalize the things that we take for granted as somehow magically operating to make us feel connected to each other, and ask ourselves, how else can we be connected to engender this sense of solidarity where what I want for my kids, I also want for my neighbor's kids. I want for the kids who don't speak English. I want for the kids who are just arriving. And so again, to push ourselves, when you think about expanding our imagination, to make it more embracing of seeming differences that are not intrinsic, that are not something that are inevitable, you know? My sister-in-law lives in Japan. And again, it's one of those places that people think, oh, you know, it's homogenous. It's, you know, from the outside, people think everyone is, you know, a shared identity.
Yeah.
But Japanese of Korean descent, among many other groups, are treated like shit. You know, they're treated, it's discriminated in so many different areas of life, and education and healthcare. When two people go to marry, sometimes their families do a deep genealogical dive to find any Korean descent in the line before they. And so again, we are so creative in creating hierarchies and distinctions out of nothing, you know? Why can't we channel that creativity to actually work in the opposite direction? If we're doing it to maintain hierarchies and division, perhaps we can do it to engender solidarity and connection, right? And I think it's a choice. When we give up our power and think, oh, this is something happening to us, we have to just navigate this crooked system as it is. I think, you know, that only serves those who are currently benefiting from the status quo. And so
there's so much depth and nuance into what she's saying. And if you don't know Ruha Benjamin, read her books, read all of her books. She's a wonderful thinker on abolition, on imagination, on technology. She's written several great books, all of which I find very useful and instructive in so many ways. I think beginning with this question of how can we reimagine the world in ways that don't limit us to a binary choice is a great place to start, right? Because as she said, if you say, well, the choice is either integration or segregation, one of them sounds good, one of them sounds bad, but I think there is more complexity to that. You know, Black folk didn't integrate or fight for integration. We didn't fight to integrate schools, for example, because we thought our IQs would go up if white people were in the room. We did so because we knew books would be there, and we knew there'd be a certain level of protection from the state. So it was always a pragmatic calculation around what the benefits were. It was never a fetishization of difference or of diversity, or particularly racial diversity. And so we always have to kind of hold on to that idea as we think about other possibilities. How do we get the best part of diversity? How do we get the best parts of integration without losing sight of the things that we had when we weren't integrated, like a certain kind of community solidarity, a certain kind of class diversity, a certain kind of institution building ethic? How do we hold on to those things? And for me, figuring out how to get the best of those worlds is the actual answer. Someone is asking a very important question, which is what's the middle ground? Now, I don't know off the top of my head. I don't know exactly what that mode is. And Trevor begins with this sort of historical counterfactual of, well, what would happen? Was this a mistake? I.e., what would happen had we not done this? And I don't know what the answer is. I mean, you know, part of what the Supreme Court determined is that separate is not equal in this country. Why? Because it's a white supremacist world. We lived in an apartheid nation. And so, like any apartheid nation, separate is never going to be equal. And that's why it was important to never be separate. But I don't know, you know, where we would be if we'd stayed together. Will we have been able to organize freedom in a different way? Which should we have done what the Nation of Islam wanted to do and what other nationalists wanted to do, which was to completely separate and even designate certain states in the United States as ours. I mean, these are all possibilities. I don't have an answer, but I love the idea of reimagining what was possible and what is possible by saying, hey, even integration is something that we shouldn't take for granted as a good. Is it difficult for you to imagine a world where segregation could be good?
For me?
Because I struggle with it to imagine what that would look like.
So it's, well, okay, a couple of things. One, I want to say that I, like you, I am a product of public school in the 90s. I don't know if you were a product of busing, but I certainly was.
I was, yeah.
Yeah. So what I find interesting, and I'm super interested to get your take on that, because I was literally having this conversation just a week ago. When we're talking about segregation or integration, I do think it's the wrong question. And I'm not surprised. And again, this is all due respect to Mr. Noah, but I'm not really surprised that Trevor Noah would ask the wrong question. And that is all shade, all tea. Anyway, so, but that, I don't think that's the right question, right? Because again, it lives on a binary, and it also has this idea that it's such a fallacy to think that we had some kind of like good school system going, you know what I mean? Access to books that were better, access to shitty books. Do you know what I'm saying? Like we have to reimagine what education is like. I think often about the kids who were bused in from East Chattanooga to where I live. And I feel infinitely better and broader to have gone to a school that was not homogenous at all. But I think all the time about, especially recently, I don't want to say that I've been some like amazing white person my whole life, but I've definitely had thoughts in the last few years thinking about what the inverse of that, how it felt to be bused from your neighborhood into kind of a hillbilly neighborhood of white folks. Do you know what I mean? Where every Friday, all the white dudes show up in camo overalls. Do you know what I'm saying? Because they're going hunting for the weekend. I mean, just the visuals of this, it, like I said, it made me, Nicole, the white lady, right, an infinitely better person to be exposed to tons of different identities. At the expense of what? At the expense of people's safety, their comfort, their ability to learn, their space to learn, their ability to take up space in a learning environment. I feel really grateful that I also had like a lot of Black teachers to recognize Black people in authority. I think that's something that a lot of white folks miss out on. And authority.
Yeah.
I mean, right, because we've talked about this. But anyway, I'm saying all this to say that spaces like this, like Night School, which you can support with a wonderful super chat or a super sticker, a donation to the MLH channel or the Cash App, or all of the wonderful mechanized ways to support this man in his venture to educate the masses. But I think we have to talk about democratizing education. I hate to use that word because it's such a buzzword, but we need to talk about reimagining what education is. So I love that she's talking about expanding our imagination, thinking about what we can create. That has been like, I think, where we're at now, because I mean, girl, it ain't good. And also, Trevor Noah, what you doing? Where are you at on Gaza?